Daughter of the Blood by Anne Bishop. Chapter 1. Part 1. Terreille. Lucivar Yaslana, the Aryan half-breed, watched the guards drag the sobbing man to the boat. He felt no sympathy for the condemned man who had led the aborted slave revolt. In the territory called pron, sympathy was a luxury no slave could afford. He had refused to participate in the revolt. The ringleaders were good men, but they didn't have the strength, the backbone, or the balls to do what was needed. They didn't enjoy seeing blood run. He had not participated. Zilta, the queen of pron, had punished him anyway. The heavy shackles around his neck and wrists had already rubbed his skin raw, and his back was a throbbing ache from the lash. He spread his dark, membranous wings, trying to ease the ache in his back. A guard immediately prodded him with a club, then retreated, skittish, at his soft hiss of anger. Unlike the other slaves, who couldn't contain their misery or fear, there was no expression in Lucivar's gold eyes, no psychic scent of emotions for the guards to play with as they put the sobbing man into the old one-man boat. No longer seaworthy, the boat showed gaping holes in its rotten wood, holes that only added to its value now. The condemned man was small and half-starved. It still took 6 guards to put him into the boat. 5 guards held the man's head, arms, and legs. The last guard smeared bacon grease onto the man's genitals before sliding a wooden cover into place. It fit snugly over the boat, with holes cut out for the head and hands. Once the man's hands were tied to iron rings on the outside of the boat, the cover was locked into place so no one but the guards could remove it. One guard studied the imprisoned man and shook his head in mock dismay. Turning to the others, he said, "He should have a last meal before being put to sea." The guards laughed. The man cried for help. One by one, the guards carefully shoved food into the man's mouth before herding the other slaves to the stables where they were quartered. "You'll be entertained tonight, boys," a guard yelled, laughing. "Remember it the next time you decide to leave Lady Zilta's service." Lucivar looked over his shoulder, then looked away again. Drawn by the smell of food, the rats slipped into the gaping holes in the boat. The man in the boat screamed. Clouds scudded across the moon, gray shrouds hiding its light. The man in the boat didn't move. His knees were open sores, bloody from kicking the top of the boat in his effort to keep the rats away. His vocal cords were destroyed from screaming. Lucivar yet knelt behind the boat, moving carefully to muffle the sound of the chains. I didn't tell him, Yassi," the man said hoarsely. They tried to make me tell, but I didn't. I had that much honor left." Lucivar held a cup to the man's lips. "Drink this," he said, his voice a deep murmur, a part of the night. "No," the man moaned. "No!" He began to cry, a harsh, guttural sound pulled from his ruined throat. "Hush now. Hush. It will help." Supporting the man's head, Lucivar eased the cup between the swollen lips. After 2 swallows, Lucivar put the cup aside and stroked the man's head with gentle fingertips. "It will help," he crooned. "I'm a warlord of the blood." When Lucivar offered the cup again, the man took another sip. As his voice got stronger, the words began to slur. "You're a warlord, Prince. Why do they do this to us, Yazzie?" "Because they have no honor. Because they don't remember what it means to be blood. The high priestess of Hail's influence is a plague that's been spreading across the realm for centuries, slowly consuming every territory it touches." "Maybe the Landons are right then. Maybe the blood are evil." Lucivar continued stroking the man's forehead and temples. "No, we are what we are. Nothing more, nothing less. There is good and evil among every kind of people. It's the evil among us who rule now." "And where are the good among us?" the man asked sleepily. Lucifer kissed the top of the man's head. "They've been destroyed or enslaved." He offered the cup. "Finish it, little brother, and it will be finished." After the man took the last swallow, Lucifer used craft to vanish the cup. The man in the boat laughed. "I feel very brave, Yassi." "You are very brave." "The rats. My balls are gone." "I know." "I cried, Yassi. Before all of them, I cried." "It doesn't matter. I'm a warlord. I shouldn't have cried." "You didn't tell. You had courage when you needed it." "Zulta killed the others anyway." "She'll pay for it, little brother. Someday she and the others like her will pay for it all." Lucifer gently massaged the man's neck. "Yassi, The movement was sudden, the sound sharp. Lucifer carefully let the lolling head fall backward and slowly rose to his feet. He could have told them the plan wouldn't work, that the ring of obedience could be fine-tuned sufficiently to alert its owner to an inner drawing of strength and purpose. He could have told them that the malignant tendrils that kept them enslaved had spread too far, and it would take a sweeter savagery than a man was capable of to free them. He could have told them there were crueler weapons than the ring to keep a man obedient, that their concern for each other would destroy them, that the only way to escape for even a little while was to care for none, to be alone. He could have told them. And yet, when they had approached him timidly, cautiously, eager to ask a man who had broken free again and again over the centuries, but was still enslaved, all he had said was, "Sacrifice everything." They had gone away, disappointed, unable to understand what he had meant. He had meant what he'd said, sacrifice everything. And there was one thing he wouldn't sacrifice. How many times after he'd surrendered and had been tethered again by that cruel ring of gold around his organ, had Damon found him and pinned him against a wall, snarling with rage, calling him a fool and a coward to give in. Liar, silky, court-trained liar. Once, Dorothea saw Diablo had searched desperately for Damon Sadi after he'd vanished from a court without a trace. It had taken hundreds of years to find him, and 2,000 warlords had died trying to recapture him. He could have used that small, savage territory that he had held and conquered half the realm of Terreille, could have become a tangible threat to 𝘭𝘪's encroachment and absorption of every people it touched. Instead, he had read a letter Dorothea sent through a messenger, read it, and surrendered. The letter had simply said, "Surrender by the new moon. Every day you are gone thereafter, I will take a piece of your brother's body in payment for your arrogance." Lucifer shook himself, trying to dislodge the unwelcome thoughts. In some ways, memories were worse than the lash, for they led to thoughts of Escavi, with the mountains rising to cut the sky, and its valleys filled with towns, farms, and forests. Not that Escavi was that fertile anymore, having been raped for far too many centuries by those who took but never gave anything back. Still, it was home, and centuries of enslaved exile had left him aching for the smell of clean mountain air, the taste of a sweet, cold stream, the silence of the woods, and most of all, the mountains where the Aryan race soared. But he was in Pron, that hot, scrubby desert wasteland, serving that bitch Zulta because he couldn't hide his disgust for Prithian, Escavi's high priestess, couldn't leash his temper enough to serve witches he despised. Among the blood, males were meant to serve, not to rule. He had never challenged that, despite the number of witches he'd killed over the centuries. He had killed them, because it was an insult to serve them, because he was an Aryan warlord prince who wore ebon gray jewels and refused to believe that serving and groveling meant the same thing. Because he was a half-breed bastard, he had no hope of attaining a position of authority within a court, despite the rank of his jewels. Because he was a trained Aryan warrior and had a temper that was explosive even for a warlord prince, he had even less hope of being allowed to live outside the social chains of a court. And he was caught, as all blood males were caught. There was something bred into them that made them crave service, that compelled them to bond in some way with a blood-jeweled female. Lucifer twitched his shoulders and sucked air through his teeth as the lash wound reopened. When he gingerly touched the wound, his hand came away wet with fresh blood. He bared his teeth in a bitter smile. What was that old saying? A wish offered with blood is a prayer to the darkness. He closed his eyes, raised his hand toward the night sky, and turned inward, descending into the psychic abyss to the depth of his ebon gray jewels, so that the wish would remain private, so that no one in Zilta's court could hear the sending of his thought. Just once, I'd like to serve a queen I could respect. Someone I could truly believe in. A strong queen who wouldn't fear my strength. A queen I could also call a friend. Dryly amused by his own foolishness, Lucifer wiped his hand on his baggy cotton pants and sighed. It was a shame that the pronouncement Terreille had made 700 years ago had been nothing more than a mad delusion. For a while, it had given him hope. It had taken him a long time to realize that hope was a bitter thing. Hello? Lucifer looked towards the stables where the slaves were quartered. The guards would make their nightly check soon. He'd have another minute to savor the night air, even if it smelled hot and dusty, before returning to the filthy cell with its bed of dirty, bug-infested straw, before returning to the stink of fear, unwashed bodies, and human waste. Hello? Lucifer turned in a slow circle, his physical senses alert, his mind probing the area for the source of that thought. Psychic communication could be broadcast to everyone in an area, like shouting in a crowded room, or narrowed to a single jewel rank or gender, or narrowed even further to a single mind. That thought seemed directly aimed at him. There was nothing out there except the expected. Whatever it was gone. Lucifer shook his head. He was getting as skittish as the Landons, the non-blood of each race, with their superstitions about evil stalking in the night. Hello? Lucifer spun around, his dark wings flaring for balance as he set his feet in a fighting stance. He felt like a fool when he saw the girl staring at him, wide-eyed. She was a scrawny thing, about 7 years old. Calling her plain would have been kind, but even in the moonlight, she had the most extraordinary eyes. They reminded him of a twilight sky or a deep mountain lake. Her clothes were of good quality, certainly better than a beggar child would wear. Her gold hair was done up in sausage curls that indicated care, even if they looked ridiculous around her pointed little face. "What are you doing here?" he asked roughly. She laced her fingers and hunched her shoulders. I heard you. You wanted a friend." "You heard me?" Lucifer stared at her. How in the name of hell had she heard him? True, he had sent that wish out, but on an ebon gray thread. He was the only ebon gray in the realm of Terreille. The only jewel darker than his was the black, and the only person who wore that was Damon Sadi. Unless... No, she couldn't be. At that moment, the girl's eyes flicked from him to the dead man in the boat, then back to him. I have to go," she whispered, backing away from him. "No, you don't." He came to her, soft-footed, a hunter stalking his prey. She bolted. He caught her within seconds. heedless of the noise the chains made. Looping a chain over her, he wrapped an arm around her waist and lifted her off her feet, grunting when her heel banged his knee. He ignored her attempts to scratch, and her kicks, while bruising, weren't the same kind of a deterrent that one good kick in the right place would have been. When she started shrieking, he clamped a hand over her mouth. She promptly sank her teeth into his finger. Lucifer bit back a howl and swore under his breath. He dropped to his knees, pulling her with him. "Hush!" he whispered fiercely. "Do you want to bring the guards down on us?" She probably did, and he expected her to struggle even harder, knowing that there was help nearby. Instead, she froze. Lucifer laid his cheek against her head and sucked air. "You're a spittin' little cat," he said quietly, fighting to keep the laughter out of his voice. "Why did you kill him?" Did he imagine it, or did her voice change? She still sounded like a young girl, but thunder, caverns, and midnight skies were in that voice. "He was suffering." "Couldn't you take him to a healer?" "Healers don't bother with slaves," he snapped. "Besides, the rats didn't leave enough of him to heal." He pulled her tighter against his chest, hoping physical warmth would make her stop shuddering. She looked so pale against his light brown skin, and he knew it wasn't simply because she was fair-skinned. "I'm sorry. That was cruel." When she started struggling against his hold, he raised his arms so that she could slip under the chain between his wrists. She scrambled out of reach, spun around, and dropped to her knees. They studied each other. "What's your name?" she finally asked. "I'm called Yazzie." He laughed when she wrinkled her nose. "Don't blame me. I didn't choose it." "It's a silly word for someone like you. What's your real name?" Lucifer hesitated. Aryans were one of the long-lived races. He'd had 1,700 years to gain a reputation for being vicious and violent. If she'd heard any of the stories about him. He took a deep breath and released it slowly. "Lucifer Islana." No reaction, except a shy smile of approval. "What's your name, Cat?" "Janelle." He grinned. "Nice name, but I think Cat suits you just as well." She snarled. "See?" He hesitated, but he had to ask. Zolta's guessing he'd killed that slave, and knowing for sure, would make a difference when he was stretched between the whipping posts. "Is your family visiting, Lady Zolta?" Janelle frowned. "Who?" Really, she did look like a kitten trying to figure out how to pounce on a large, hoppy bug. "Zolta, the Queen of pron.𝘈." "What's pron.𝘈?" "This is pron.𝘈." Lucifer waved in hand to indicate the land around them, and then swore in Aryan when the chains rattled. He swallowed the last curse when he noticed the intense, interested look on her face. "Since you're not from pron.𝘈, and your family isn't visiting, where are you from?" When she hesitated, he tipped his head towards the boat. "I can keep a secret." "I'm from Chelat." "Che," Lucifer bit back another curse. "Do you understand Aryan?" "No," Janelle grinned at him, "but now I know some Aryan words." Should he laugh or strangle her? "How did you get here?" She fluffed her hair and frowned at the rocky ground between them. Finally, she shrugged. "Same way I get to other places." "You ride the winds?" he yelped. She raised a finger to test the air. "Not breezes or puffs of air," Lucifer ground his teeth. "The winds, the webs, the psychic roads in the darkness." Janelle perked up. "Is that what they are?" He managed to stop in mid-curse. Janelle leaned forward. "Are you always this prickly?" "Most people think I'm a prick, yes." "What's that mean?" "Never mind." He chose a sharp stone and drew a circle on the ground between them. "This is the realm of Terreille." He placed a round stone in the circle. "This is the Black Mountain, Ebenesgavi, where the winds meet." He drew straight lines from the round stone to the circumference of the circle. "These are tether lines." He drew smaller circles within the circle. "These are radial lines. The winds are like a spider web. You can travel on the tether or the radial lines, changing direction where they intersect. There's a web for each rank of the blood jewels. The darker the web, the more tether and radial lines there are, and the faster the wind is. You can ride a web that's your rank or lighter. You can't ride a web darker than your jewel rank unless you're traveling inside a coach being driven by someone strong enough to ride that web, or you're being shielded by someone who can ride that web. If you try, you probably won't survive. Understand? Janelle chewed on her lower lip and pointed to a space between the strands. What if I want to go there? Lucifer shook his head. You'd have to drop back from the web back into the realm at the nearest point and travel some other way. That's not how I got here, she protested. Lucifer shuddered. There wasn't a strand of any web around Zolta's compound. Her court was deliberately in one of those blank spaces. The only way to get here, directly from the winds, was by leaving the web and gliding blind through the darkness, which, even for the strongest and the best, was a chancy thing to do. Unless... Come here, Cat, he said gently. When she dropped in front of him, he rested his hands on her thin shoulders. Do you often go wandering? Janelle nodded slowly. People call me, like you did. Like he did. Mother Night. Cat, listen to me. Children are vulnerable to many dangers. There is a strange expression in her eyes. Yes, I know. Sometimes an enemy can wear the mask of a friend until it's too late to escape. Yes, she whispered. Lucifer shook her gently, forcing her to look at him. Terreille is a dangerous place for little cats. Please, go home, and don't go wandering anymore. Don't answer the people who call you. But then I won't see you anymore. Lucifer closed his gold eyes. A knife in the heart would hurt less. I know, but you will always be friends. And it's not forever. When you're grown up, I'll come find you, or you'll come find me. Janelle nibbled her lip. How old is grown up? Yesterday. Tomorrow. Let's say 17. It sounds like forever, I know, but it's really not that long. Even Sadi couldn't have spun a better lie than that. Will you promise not to go wandering? Janelle sighed. I promise not to go wandering in Terreille. Lucifer hauled her to her feet and spun her around. There's one thing I want to teach you before you go. This will work if a man ever tries to grab you from behind. When they'd gone through the demonstration enough times that he was sure she knew what to do, Lucifer kissed her forehead and stepped back. Get out of here. The guards will be making the rounds any minute now. And remember, a queen never breaks a promise to a warlord prince. I'll remember, she hesitated. Lucifer, I won't look the same when I'm grown up. How will you know me? Lucifer smiled. 10 years or 100. It would make no difference. He'd always recognized those extraordinary sapphire eyes. I'll know. Goodbye, Cat. May the darkness embrace you. She smiled at him and vanished. Lucifer stared at that empty space. Was that a foolish thing to say to her? Probably. A gate rattling caught his attention. He swiftly rubbed out the drawing of the winds and slipped from shadow to shadow until he reached the stables. He passed through the outside walls and had just settled into his cell when the guard opened the barred window in the door. Zolta was arrogant enough to believe her holding spells kept her slaves from using craft to pass through the cell walls. It was uncomfortable to pass through a spelled wall, but not impossible for him. Let the bitch wonder. When the guards found the slave in the boat, she'd suspect him of breaking the man's neck. She suspected him when anything went wrong in her court, with good reason. Perhaps he would offer a little resistance when the guards tried to tie him to the whipping post. A vicious sprawl would keep Zolta distracted, and the violent emotions would cover up any lingering psychic scent from the girl. Oh yes, he could keep Lady Zolta so distracted she would never realize that witch now walked the realm.